My name is Ethan, and I've always considered myself a man of routine. Stability has been my anchor, especially in my marriage to Melissa. We met in college, me, a driven engineering student, and her, a bright-eyed art history major. The spark between us was undeniable. We built a life together filled with late-night talks, shared dreams, and eventually, a comfortable home in the suburbs. For years, I thought we had a solid foundation. Sure, our lives got busier, my job demanded long hours, and Melissa poured her heart into her freelance art career. But I believed in us. It wasn't until last Tuesday that the first seeds of doubt were planted. Melissa had started taking evening art classes at the local college a few months ago, something she said would reignite her creative spark. I was proud of her for pursuing her passions. But that night, when I went to pick her up because her car was in the shop, I noticed something unusual. She didn't exit the building alone. A young man, no older than 20, walked beside her, leaning in close. Their laughter echoed in the cool evening air. Melissa hadn't mentioned making any new friends, and this boy didn't seem like someone from her usual circle. She looked different with him. There was a lightness in her step and a shine in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a while. When she spotted me, her expression changed, a flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by her usual warm smile. "Ethan, you're early," she exclaimed, her tone a little too bright. "Thought I'd surprise you," I replied, masking my unease. The young man offered a polite nod before slipping away, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Who was that?" I asked as Melissa climbed into the car. "Oh, just Lucas," she said casually. "He's in my class. A real prodigy, honestly. His sculptures are phenomenal." Her explanation seemed innocent enough, but something gnawed at me. Maybe it was the way she had tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear while talking about him, or the faint blush on her cheeks. I told myself I was overthinking. Melissa was dedicated, loyal, and honest. After 10 years together, I trusted her implicitly. But trust, as I'd soon learn, is a fragile thing. The days following that evening were filled with a strange, gnawing tension I couldn't shake. Melissa seemed different. At first, I convinced myself it was just her being energized by her art classes. After all, passion could be infectious, right? But little things started to stand out. She was spending more time on her appearance. It wasn't the casual effort she usually made when we went out together, it was something more deliberate. Subtle makeup, perfume I hadn't smelled before, and outfits that didn't quite match her usual style. And then there were the late nights. One evening, Melissa called to say her class had been extended because the professor had asked for volunteers to help organize an upcoming art exhibition. It wasn't unusual for her to throw herself into her work, but something about her tone felt off. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Of course. Why do you ask? You sound distracted." She let out a nervous laugh. "I'm just busy, Ethan. I'll be home soon." That soon turned into hours. I waited in the living room, staring at the muted television, trying to suppress the paranoia creeping into my thoughts. When she finally came home, it was past midnight. She looked flushed, her hair slightly disheveled, and when I asked how the evening went, her answers were clipped and vague. I decided not to press her. Maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe this was nothing. But then Lucas's name started coming up in conversation. It was always casual, like he was just part of the fabric of her classes. "Lucas had the most amazing idea for the exhibit," or "Lucas helped me figure out the lighting for one of my pieces." It was subtle, but I could hear it in her voice, the excitement, the admiration. A part of me wanted to ignore it. I loved Melissa. We had built a life together, and I couldn't imagine her betraying me. But another part of me, the part that noticed her increasingly secretive behavior, refused to let it go. One evening, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I wasn't the kind of man who snooped, but something compelled me to glance at the screen. It was a message from Lucas. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last night was incredible. My blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt beneath me as the implications of that message hit me like a freight train. Last night? Incredible. My mind raced, trying to rationalize, to deny, to rewrite what I had just seen. By the time Melissa came downstairs, wrapped in a towel and humming softly, I had already shoved the phone back where I'd found it, my heart pounding in my chest. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice light, as if she didn't have a care in the world. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But I wasn't tired. I was burning with questions, with doubts, with anger. If Lucas's message meant what I thought it did, then my wife, the woman I'd loved and trusted for 10 years, was hiding something unforgivable. I told myself I needed proof. Real proof. Because if I confronted her now, she'd just deny it, wouldn't she? The cracks in our marriage were there, growing wider every day. And I knew, sooner or later, they were going to break us apart. The message from Lucas consumed me. I replayed the words in my head, over and over, as if by dissecting them I could find an explanation that didn't lead to betrayal. But there was no denying the undertone. I wasn't ready to confront Melissa, not yet. I needed more than a gut feeling and a suggestive text. I needed the truth. The next day, while Melissa was out, I started digging. Her phone was locked now, probably a habit she'd picked up recently, but I still had access to our shared computer. My hands trembled as I logged into her email account, something I'd never even considered doing before. There wasn't much at first, just the usual correspondence with friends, a few art newsletters, and receipts for online shopping. But then I saw it, a forwarded email from her professor, marked with the subject line, "Final Project Guidelines." It wasn't the email itself that stood out. It was the note Melissa had added when she forwarded it to Lucas. "We should talk more about this tonight. Your place." I felt my stomach churn. Why was she forwarding project guidelines to him? Why did she need to go to his place? Pushing the sick feeling aside, I scoured our calendar. Melissa had made a habit of syncing her art classes and deadlines with mine to avoid scheduling conflicts. I found a notation from 2 weeks ago, innocently titled, "Study Session," logged for a Wednesday night. That same Wednesday, she'd come home late, claiming the professor needed help setting up for the exhibit. I sat back, the pieces slowly falling into place. There was no proof of anything physical yet, but the pattern was clear. They were spending time together, alone. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I called a private investigator. The man I spoke to, a no-nonsense professional named Dan, listened as I explained my suspicions. "I just need to know what's going on," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Dan agreed to take the case. He'd follow Melissa during her next class and let me know if anything unusual happened. "It's better to have evidence," he assured me. "Otherwise, she could just deny it, and you'll be stuck wondering." That evening, Melissa came home cheerful, chatting about her day as if nothing was amiss. I forced myself to act normal, laughing at her jokes and nodding at her stories, all while my mind raced ahead to the next steps. The following Wednesday, Dan called me with his findings. "She's not at class," he said bluntly. "What do you mean?" I asked, my throat dry. "She met up with the guy you mentioned, Lucas. They left the college together and drove to an apartment about 10 minutes away. I've got photos if you need them." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. Did you see anything else?" "Not yet. I'll stay on them." I thanked him and hung up, my mind reeling. The confirmation was both a relief and a devastating blow. When Melissa came home that night, I watched her carefully. She was flushed, her cheeks glowing, and she hummed as she prepared herself a late dinner. "How was class?" I asked, struggling to keep my tone neutral. Exhausting, she said with a laugh, not missing a beat. The professor is really pushing us hard to get everything ready for the exhibit. It was a lie. I knew it. But I didn't call her out, not yet. I needed to see this through to the end. Dan's call lingered in my mind like an unwanted echo. She wasn't at class. She was with Lucas. I spent the next few days oscillating between heartbreak and anger. Melissa's cheerful demeanor felt like a mockery of the life we had built. Every time she smiled, kissed my cheek, or laughed at my jokes, it felt hollow. I found myself questioning every memory, every word, wondering when the lies had started. I needed more. I needed undeniable proof. Dan called again that Friday evening. "Ethan, I followed them again today," he said. They met at a cafe near the college around lunchtime, then headed back to his apartment. They stayed there for a few hours before she left. I've got photos and timestamps. My stomach clenched. What were they doing? I didn't follow her inside, Dan admitted. But it's clear they're spending significant time together outside of her art classes. I'll email you the photos. Take a look and let me know if you need anything else. I thanked him, though the words felt mechanical. When the email came through, I hesitated before opening it, my finger hovering over the mouse. Once I saw what was in those pictures, there would be no going back. With a deep breath, I clicked. The first photo was innocuous enough, Melissa and Lucas sitting across from each other at the cafe, laughing over their drinks. But the next one. They were walking side by side, her arm brushing against his. In the third photo, she leaned in close, her hand resting lightly on his chest as they stood near his car. The intimacy in her posture, the look on her face, it spoke volumes. I stared at the images until my vision blurred. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was real. That night, I lay awake beside her, the evidence burned into my mind. I wanted to confront her then and there, to demand answers, but I held back. I needed a plan. An unprepared confrontation would only lead to deflection, excuses, and denial. The next morning, I reached out to Dan again. "I need more," I said. "More?" he asked, his tone cautious. "I need something concrete. If she's cheating on me, I want absolute proof. Can you confirm what's happening in that apartment?" Dan hesitated. "It's risky, Ethan. But I can try." "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I need to know," I said firmly. Later that day, I took a long drive to clear my head, trying to make sense of the storm inside me. How could Melissa, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, betray me like this? And with someone like Lucas, a college kid, barely old enough to rent his own apartment. When I got home, Melissa was in the living room, casually scrolling through her phone. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing up. "Yeah," I said, my voice tight. But everything was far from okay. My world was unraveling, and Melissa didn't even notice. Dan called me 2 days later. His voice was grim. "I got what you needed," he said. My chest tightened. "What did you find?" "She's cheating, Ethan. No more doubt about it." I caught them leaving the apartment together, and I followed them to a secluded park. I recorded enough to confirm what's going on. I felt the world tilt, my breath catching in my throat. "Send me everything." When the email arrived, I couldn't bring myself to open it right away. My hand shook as I hovered over the files. Whatever was inside would change everything. Finally, I clicked. The video showed them sitting together on a park bench, laughing, their bodies too close. At one point, Lucas leaned in and kissed her. Melissa didn't pull away. She kissed him back, her hands tangled in his hair. I closed the file and sank into my chair, my head in my hands. The proof I'd sought was here, undeniable and devastating. Melissa had betrayed me. I spent the next few hours in a haze, staring at the proof of Melissa's betrayal. Her laugh, her touch, her kiss, they all belonged to someone else now. My wife of 10 years had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. When she came home that evening, humming a cheerful tune, the juxtaposition was almost unbearable. She greeted me with a kiss, the same lips that had kissed Lucas only days before. "How was your day?" she asked casually, kicking off her shoes and heading to the kitchen. I followed her, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. My mind raced with all the things I wanted to say, but my voice betrayed none of it. "Uneventful," I replied, my tone calm, too calm. Melissa opened the fridge, rummaging around for a snack. She looked so normal. As if nothing had changed. As if she wasn't ripping my heart apart with every breath she took. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Melissa," I said, my voice sharp enough to make her freeze. "We need to talk." She turned to face me, a puzzled expression on her face. "What's wrong?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. Part of me wanted to scream, to unleash all the pain and anger boiling inside me. But I knew I had to stay in control. "I know about Lucas," I said finally, my voice low but firm. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw the panic flash across her face. She quickly masked it with confusion. "What are you talking about?" she asked, feigning innocence. "Don't lie to me, Melissa," I said, my voice rising. "I know you've been seeing him. I know about the cafe, the park, the apartment. I have proof." Her mouth opened as if to deny it again, but then she stopped. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at the floor. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. The admission hit me like a punch to the gut. Even though I'd prepared for this moment, hearing her say the words shattered something inside me. "How long?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Ethan, How long, Melissa?" I snapped, my anger finally breaking through. She flinched but answered, "A few months." A few months. While I'd been working late, planning our future, believing in the life we'd built together, she had been sneaking around with a kid barely out of college. "Why?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Why him? Why anyone?" She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know," she said. I felt stuck. Like my life was passing me by, and I needed something to remind me who I was before all of this. "Before all of this?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean before us?" Melissa shook her head. "No, that's not what I meant. Ethan, I love you, I do. But I've felt lost. And Lucas, he made me feel alive again." Her words felt like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. "Alive?" I said, my voice dripping with bitterness. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us? You didn't just cheat, Melissa. You destroyed everything we built together." Tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't find any sympathy for her. She had made this choice. She had betrayed me. "I didn't want to hurt you," she sobbed. "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "Because you've succeeded." I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there, her cries echoing in the hollow silence of our home. As I shut the door to our bedroom, I realized that this confrontation was only the beginning. The damage was done, but the fallout was just starting. The night after the confrontation was one of the longest of my life. Melissa tried knocking on the bedroom door, pleading for me to talk to her, but I couldn't bear to face her. Eventually, her voice faded, and I heard the soft creak of the guest room door closing. I lay awake in the dark, my mind racing with questions that had no answers. What had I missed? When had our life started to unravel? Could I have done something, anything, to stop this? By morning, the silence between us was deafening. Melissa tried to act normal as she made coffee, her eyes red and swollen. I sat across from her at the dining table, staring into my cup as the weight of everything pressed down on me. "We need to figure out where we go from here," she said hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where we go?" I repeated bitterly. "Melissa, you destroyed our marriage. You don't get to decide where we go from here." She winced, but I didn't care. She deserved to feel every ounce of the pain she had caused. "I want to make this right," she said, tears brimming in her eyes again. "I'll do whatever it takes." I scoffed, shaking my head. "You think you can fix this?" "How, Melissa?" "By erasing the past few months. By undoing everything you've done with him." Her tears spilled over, and she covered her face with her hands. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I'm so sorry." The words sounded hollow, like they were meant more to ease her guilt than to mend the gaping wound she'd left in my heart. "I need space," I said, standing up abruptly. "I can't think straight with you here." "Where will you go?" she asked, panic flickering across her face. "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. "You are." Her mouth opened in protest, but I cut her off. "Pack a bag, Melissa. Go stay with a friend, your parents, anyone. But I can't be around you right now." She hesitated, then nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Without another word, she disappeared upstairs to gather her things. As I listened to the sound of her footsteps, I felt a strange mix of relief and grief. I needed her gone, but the thought of her absence felt like a final nail in the coffin of the life we had built together. Later that day, I sat alone in the living room, staring blankly at the television. The house felt too quiet, too empty, as if her leaving had sucked the life out of it. A notification buzzed on my phone, breaking the silence. It was an email from Dan, the private investigator. "Ethan, thought you might want these for your records." Attached were more photos and a detailed report of Melissa's meetings with Lucas. I debated whether to open it, wondering if I could handle seeing more. But curiosity, and the need for closure, won out. The photos were damning. More meetings, more stolen moments, more proof of the life Melissa had been leading behind my back. And then there was the final note in Dan's report. "Lucas is a senior at the local college, but it appears he's been leveraging his connections to Melissa for more than just companionship. Based on their conversations, he's been using her to secure funding for his art projects, including some sizable donations from her personal accounts." My blood ran cold. Not only had she betrayed me emotionally, but she had also allowed herself to be manipulated by someone who clearly saw her as a means to an end. The betrayal deepened, and with it, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my life, and my future. Melissa was gone by the evening, her absence leaving the house in a strange limbo. Her clothes no longer draped over the chair in the bedroom, her shoes no longer by the door. But the ghost of her presence lingered, haunting every corner of our home. I avoided our bedroom that night, opting to sleep on the couch instead. My dreams were plagued by fragmented images of her and Lucas, his hand on her back, her laugh, their kiss in the park. Each time I jolted awake, the ache in my chest felt heavier. The next morning, I resolved to take control of the situation. No more drowning in anger or heartbreak. I needed clarity, answers, and closure. My first stop was the financial records. I logged into our joint account, scrolling through transactions Melissa had made over the past few months. I hadn't paid much attention before, why would I? I trusted her. But now, with Dan's report fresh in my mind, I couldn't ignore the signs. It didn't take long to find them. Withdrawals of significant amounts, all labeled as personal expenses. Some were transferred to an account I didn't recognize, while others were tied to purchases at high-end art supply stores and cafes. And then there was the bombshell, a $10,000 withdrawal marked as project support. My jaw clenched as I cross-referenced it with Dan's report. It aligned perfectly with a date Lucas had received approval for a public art installation on campus. Melissa wasn't just seeing him, she was financing his ambitions. I felt like a fool. By afternoon, I couldn't bear the silence anymore. I picked up my phone and called her. She answered on the third ring, her voice tentative. "Ethan. We need to talk," I said curtly. "Of course. I'll come back now if you—" "No," I interrupted. "We'll meet somewhere neutral. The park by the library. Half an hour." She agreed, and I hung up, already bracing myself for the conversation ahead. When I arrived at the park, she was already there, sitting on a bench near the fountain. She looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, pity, maybe. But it was quickly swallowed by the storm of anger swirling inside me. I sat down beside her, leaving a deliberate gap between us. "I know about the money," I said without preamble. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What money?" "Don't play dumb, Melissa. The withdrawals, the support for Lucas's projects. You've been giving him thousands of dollars from our accounts. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. "I was trying to help him," she mumbled. "Help him?" I repeated, incredulous. "You gave him our money, Melissa. Without even asking me. Do you even hear yourself?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. He needed funding, and I thought I could help. I got caught up in it." "Caught up in what?" I snapped. "In him. In the attention. The thrill of sneaking around behind my back." "It wasn't like that," she insisted, her voice cracking. "Then tell me what it was like," I demanded, leaning forward. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you threw away our marriage for a fling with some kid who's using you for money." Melissa flinched at my words but didn't argue. Instead, she wiped her tears and looked at me with a mix of guilt and desperation. "I know I messed up," she said quietly. "But I never stopped loving you, Ethan. I was stupid and selfish, and I let it go too far. But it wasn't about money or attention. It was, I don't know. It was an escape." "An escape from what?" I asked, my voice softer now. "From feeling invisible," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "From feeling like I wasn't enough anymore. Lucas made me feel wanted, needed, and I let myself believe that for a while." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to hate her, to throw her excuses back in her face. But part of me couldn't ignore the cracks in our relationship that she was pointing to. Cracks I hadn't seen, or had chosen not to see. "Melissa," I said after a long silence, "what happens now? Because I don't know if I can come back from this." Tears filled her eyes again. "I don't know either," she said. "But I want to try. I want to fix this, Ethan. If you'll let me." I stood up, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on me. "I need time," I said simply. And with that, I walked away, leaving her sitting alone on the bench, her sobs echoing softly behind me. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions. Melissa's confession haunted me, playing over and over in my mind. Her words about feeling invisible and unappreciated dug deeper than I wanted to admit. They forced me to look not just at her betrayal but at myself and the cracks in our marriage. But anger burned alongside the guilt. She hadn't just turned to Lucas for emotional validation, she had lied, sneaked around, and dragged our finances into her mess. Forgiving that, if I could ever forgive it, wouldn't happen overnight. Melissa stayed at her sister's place, giving me the space I'd asked for. The quiet of the house should have been comforting, but instead, it felt oppressive, as if the walls were closing in around me. I called Dan one last time. "I need everything you've got on Lucas," I told him. "Already ahead of you," he replied. You'll have the report by tomorrow. Let's just say he's not as squeaky clean as your wife might think. I hung up, unsure whether that made me feel better or worse. The report arrived the next day, a dense document filled with the details of Lucas's life. It confirmed what Dan had already hinted at: Lucas was a grifter. He had a history of dating older women, usually ones with some financial means, and using their connections to fund his artistic ambitions. Melissa wasn't his first, and based on his pattern, she likely wouldn't be his last. One line in the report stood out like a flashing warning sign. Lucas has been spotted at several events with another woman, Emily Reeds, who appears to be another benefactor. Their interactions suggest a romantic connection. I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. While Melissa was tearing our marriage apart for him, Lucas was already setting his sights elsewhere. Part of me wanted to call her immediately and throw it in her face. But something stopped me. If she was going to understand the full scope of her mistake, she needed to see it for herself. That evening, I asked Melissa to meet me again, this time at a coffee shop on the edge of town. She arrived looking exhausted, her eyes rimmed with dark circles and her shoulders hunched. "Ethan," she started as soon as she sat down. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I know I don't deserve it, but—" "Wait," I said, cutting her off. "Before you say anything, there's something you need to see." I slid the report across the table, the photos and summaries of Lucas's double life printed out for her to read. She looked at the pages hesitantly, then began skimming. Her face shifted from confusion to disbelief to horror as she pieced it together. This can't be true," she whispered. "It is," I said flatly. "That's who you've been risking everything for, Melissa. A kid who's using you, and who's already lining up his next mark." Her hand trembled as she flipped through the pages, landing on a photo of Lucas with Emily. They were at a gallery opening, standing close, his arm draped casually around her waist. Melissa's breath hitched. "I didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. "Of course you didn't," I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "You were too busy chasing whatever it was he made you feel to see the truth." Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling onto the report. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I was stupid. I was blind." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Sorry isn't enough. Not for this. You broke my trust, Melissa. You broke us. And for what? For someone who didn't even care about you." Her sobs grew louder, drawing glances from the other patrons. "I didn't care. Let them look. I'll do anything to make it right," she pleaded. "Anything." I looked at her, the woman I had loved for over a decade, now a stranger across the table. For the first time, I wasn't sure if there was anything left of us to save. The sight of Melissa breaking down in the coffee shop should have stirred something in me, compassion, sympathy, even anger, but I felt numb. The woman I had loved for so many years now seemed like a shadow of herself, and all I could think about was how far we'd fallen. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us. Melissa wiped her tears with a napkin, her hand still trembling as she stared at the damning report in front of her. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice raw, "I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just tell me what to do." I studied her, searching for some semblance of the woman I thought I knew. Her desperation seemed genuine, but so had her laughter and smiles during the months she'd been sneaking around with Lucas. How could I believe anything she said now? "You don't get to decide how this gets fixed," I said finally, my voice cold. "This isn't just about you anymore. You destroyed something we built together, and you don't get to dictate how, or if, it gets rebuilt." She flinched at my words but nodded. "You're right," she whispered. "I don't have any right to ask for forgiveness. But I love you, Ethan. I never stopped loving you." I scoffed, shaking my head. "You have a funny way of showing it." Her tears returned, but I pushed forward, unwilling to let her tears sway me. Do you even understand what you've done? I asked, my voice rising slightly. You didn't just cheat, Melissa. You lied, you betrayed me, and you threw away everything we had for someone who didn't even respect you. I was stupid, she said, her voice breaking. I let myself believe in something that wasn't real because I felt lost. But I know I messed up, Ethan. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a bitter laugh. Right. And what does making it right look like to you? Pretending none of this happened? Going back to the way things were? No, she said quickly, shaking her head. I know we can't just go back. But I want to earn your trust again. I want to prove to you that I can be better. Her words hung in the air, echoing with a mix of sincerity and desperation. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the woman sitting across from me was still the same person I had fallen in love with. But the cracks in my heart felt too deep to repair. I need time, I said finally, my voice heavy. Melissa nodded, her tears falling silently now. I understand, she said. But did she? Could she? That night, I went home to the quiet, empty house. Melissa didn't follow. She texted me once to say she was staying at her sister's again and that she'd respect my need for space. I appreciated the gesture, but it did little to ease the turmoil in my mind. I wandered the house aimlessly, each room a reminder of what we had shared and what had been broken. When I entered our bedroom, I paused. Her side of the bed was neatly made, untouched since the night I'd told her to leave. On the nightstand, I noticed something she had left behind, her wedding ring. I picked it up, feeling its weight in my hand. The symbol of a promise now shattered. The next morning, I met with a divorce attorney. I told myself I was just exploring my options, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I needed to know what life would look like if I chose to walk away. The meeting was sobering. The attorney laid out the logistics of dividing assets, the steps of the legal process, and the potential pitfalls of contested versus uncontested divorce. It was all cold, clinical, and final. As I left the office, a thought struck me: was I ready to give up completely? To end our marriage without giving her, or us, a chance to heal? I didn't know the answer. But I did know one thing. Whatever happened next, it would be on my terms. The following days were filled with an oppressive quiet, broken only by the occasional text from Melissa. She was careful not to push too hard, sending simple updates about her whereabouts or asking if I needed anything. I answered sparingly, my responses curt and devoid of emotion. But inside, a storm raged. I wrestled with the weight of her betrayal, the love we once shared, and the reality of what moving forward, whether together or apart, would mean. One evening, as I sat in the living room nursing a drink, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Melissa. Ethan, can we meet? There's something I need to tell you. It's important. I hesitated. What more could she possibly say? But something about the tone of her message pulled at me. Reluctantly, I agreed. We met at the same park where we'd had our last conversation. Melissa was already there, sitting on the bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as I approached, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. I sat down beside her, leaving space between us. "What is it, Melissa?" She took a deep breath, her fingers twisting nervously. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since, everything. And there's something I need you to know before we decide where to go from here." I said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "I've cut Lucas out of my life completely," she said. "I blocked his number, deleted every message, every photo. I've also contacted the gallery about withdrawing the funding I gave him. It's over, Ethan. Completely." I studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit, but she looked sincere. And? I prompted, my voice guarded. She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. And I've started seeing a therapist. I know that doesn't fix what I've done, but I needed to understand why I let myself get so lost. Why I hurt you the way I did. Her vulnerability caught me off guard. For the first time in weeks, she seemed to be facing her mistakes head-on, without excuses or deflection. I don't expect you to forgive me, she continued, her voice trembling. But I needed to tell you that I'm trying. Not for you, or for us, but for myself. Because I can't be the person I want to be until I fix what's broken inside me. I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. This was the Melissa I had fallen in love with, flawed, human, but willing to fight for something better. I don't know if I can forgive you, I admitted, my voice raw. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. For a long time, we sat in silence, the cool evening air wrapping around us like a fragile truce. Finally, I spoke. I don't know what the future holds for us, Melissa. But I think we owe it to ourselves to find out. Her breath hitched, and she looked at me with a glimmer of hope. This doesn't mean everything is okay, I added quickly. We have a long way to go. And if we try, it has to be with honesty. No more secrets. No more lies. She nodded fervently, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. I let her take them, the warmth of her touch both familiar and foreign. I promise, she whispered. I'll do whatever it takes. As we sat there, I realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one built on the ashes of what we had once been. Whether we would succeed or fail, only time would tell. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something I thought I'd lost, hope.